and gentlemen, and at the outset, apologies for a slightly late start because I'm definitely not the moderator for this session. As you can see, I'm not Priya. But we had a confirmation that Priya was coming, and therefore maybe she got misplaced somewhere on the way. If she happens to come in between, then you will have two different moderators. But to begin with, I think when we were setting up this session, because I've had a fairly high involvement with the design, what we really were looking at in this session was finding the people and working the session around them. Okay? So in some sense, why am I mentioning this? Because they are such diverse speakers today on the panel, but yet all of them have something to do with looking at gender. Yeah? And now that, I must confess, was not even on our head. And today I have had 5 men ask me why I have an all-woman panel. And I just wondered why I didn't think of that, because it really is for their expertise, not so much for the fact that they are women is incidental to the process. Okay? So in a way, I'm honored and delighted to be on a panel of experts.
You think it is providential?
Yeah, I think that should be the order. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. And on that note, what I am going to do is the brochure here contains detailed CVs of each of them, and when they present, you would be able to see what they bring to the table. And therefore, what I'm going to do without much ado is invite them in the same order. So, Gita, you will go first, and followed by Sucharita. And then we go with Lepi, and then we close with you, Afua. Yeah.
Okay. I thought we were given a slightly different sense of how it was going to be done.
Okay.
By the moderator asking us questions
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and we were going to respond. So
I'm really sorry, and I hope you can play both the role of a moderator as well as, yes, I understand. But please help me out on this. Yeah?
Group can be a moderator.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So if you would just make some comments to begin with, and then, yeah, I'm inviting the four of you here. Yes, please.
My friends, good afternoon. Vasanthi, thanks for doing such a brilliant job of moderating on short notice. It's without much ado, let me just start. And I'm sure most of you have looked at, or I hope you have looked at, these questions which we were supposed to respond to, but we were going to have more of a, you were supposed to be the Oprah Winfrey character.
Yeah.
But since you failed to...
And they don't have an idea.
Okay, failed to walk into Oprah's shoes.
Yes.
I'm going to just start off by saying what the questions were that we are supposed to be responding to. And as you can see, there are, of course, we were supposed to deal basically with 2 big countries and 1 region. So the big countries are, guess what? India, China, and then of course Afua is here from UN Women in Africa. And the questions were broadly the same, I think, for all of us. But we were supposed to reflect on our particular country or region. So the first question was about the key forms of gender inequality in the country, and how it hinders sustainability. I assume it means sustainable growth or sustainable development. I'm not entirely sure. It said sustainability. The second question was about the role of business and other stakeholders in addressing gender inequalities in the social sense, the economic sense, and any other manner. I'm sorry, I didn't write the questions down. I just made put through some points, so that's why I can't tell you exactly what they are. The third was about what changes need to be made that that, and I suppose that's obviously related to the previous one, which is what's the role of business or other stakeholders, and that it's difficult to answer the one without the other. But also very importantly in this third question, what ethical principles need to underpin advances or movement towards gender inequality. And then the fourth is any good practices or recommended actions that each of us might want to suggest. We were supposed to do all of this, each of us, in about 5 to 7 minutes. So I've already used up, but I'm going to tell.
I have handed over my moderator time.
I'm going to take it out of the moderator's time, and my clock starts now. So I'm going to try and sort of, I'm not obviously going to be able to address all or even do any justice whatsoever to these questions in the context of India. It doesn't need to be said that India, like China and like the rather large continent of Africa, has huge diversity on questions of gender inequality between North and South, between East and West, between the different cultural forms, the different social forms, and the economic aspects as well. And we don't have the time to get into that. But among one of the things that we do know is, for this audience particularly, if you go to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, which they put out every year, the 2013 report has India ranked 101 out of 136 countries. And higher is not better, higher is worse. It's the gap, the larger the gap. There have been years in the past, and I won't get into why there is some amount of fluctuation in the rankings, sometimes fairly significant. There was a year not that long ago when India was 95 or something like that. But I think this is just, we don't need to get into that. I think roughly in that somewhere in that ranking, bad is the word. So, and this gender gap index basically looks at 4 things: economics, education, health and survival, and political empowerment. And of course, within that, it looks at different elements of it. The one on which India does quite well is political empowerment, where it's in fact ranked 9. But the only reason for that, I think, or a very large reason, it's not the only reason, the very large reason for that is because one of the subcomponents of that index is having the head of state be a woman. So given that we had a president for a number of years who was a woman, I think, and given that hardly anybody else does, I think that bumped us up in the ranking quite dramatically. But other than that, our ranking on most other things, on the economy is 124 out of 136, on education it's 120, on health and survival it's actually 135 out of 136. And political empowerment, as I said, we're 9, so we can feel very pleased about that. India, in fact, is the lowest rank of all of the BRICS countries. Brazil is 62nd, Russia is 61st, China is 69, and South Africa is actually 17. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it may be because of the problem that men in South Africa are also so badly off that the gap between men and women is not that huge as it tends to be in some other places. A great deal of this in India, of course, has to do with our traditional failure in human development policies that actually would improve education and health across the board, but particularly for girls and women. For instance, in education and literacy, where in fact India has over the years been improving fairly significantly, so that if you look at boys and men, the extent of the literacy, for instance, is practically gone. Much of what is there is reservoir illiteracy. It's the very old who are still, who you can't do much about. But for women, it's still fairly significant. Even though it's been improving, it's still quite high over 40%. And that for a country that wants to be BRICS, that wants to be G20, that wants to be, part of the leadership of this century, is an appalling figure. It's also appalling in another sense that inasmuch as our economic reforms, which began in the early 1990s, have placed India in the last 2 decades at the forefront of global economic growth, is seen as part of the economic growth engine of the world, assuming economic growth is happening. We in fact came to those reforms from a much worse position in terms of human development, and particularly the gender inequality and gender gap in human development, than almost every other country that came to those reforms in the positive sense. I mean, there's the reforms of Africa, which was structural adjustment, which actually decimated growth in Africa. But if we look at many other, most of the countries, certainly if you look at our neighbors in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, in China, and so on, all of them, by the time they embark on very rapid growth, starting with Japan, moving through the Asian tigers, through the Southeast Asian panthers, and so on, every one of them, if you look at the indices on health and education and the gender gaps, far, far better when they embark on the phase of rapid economic growth. When India started in 1991, we were much, much worse off. And I believe that both, therefore, from an instrumental as well as an intrinsic perspective on the value of gender equality, there is obviously gender equality is a good thing in itself. It's a good thing from the perspective of human rights. It's a good thing from the perspective of a democracy. It's a good thing from the perspective of thinking about what kind of 21st century are we talking about. But it also obviously has huge instrumentality in that huge proportion of half of your population and labor force is severely underutilized, is undercapacitated and underutilized, and that, I think, is where you see the dramatic difference between us and some of our not immediate South Asian neighbors, but the neighbors a little bit further off. In fact, we have a South Asian neighbor that does much better than us, which is, of course, Bangladesh. And Bangladesh's rank in the World Economic Forum rankings is 75. Which, given Bangladesh's poverty, its size, the complexities and difficulties it has had, is quite significant. And a great deal of that is, of course, related to policy. It's not related to somehow women in Bangladesh were much better off historically. They were not much better off than their counterparts on the other side of the border. But policies in Bangladesh have systematically addressed these problems, and you see it quite significantly in Bangladesh. I'll just take my last 1 minute to say a couple of other things. So what is it that business and other stakeholders need to be involved in this? If business is concerned, not just with the immediate bottom line of your particular corporation or whatever it is, but really with creating the climate and the environment for sustainability over a longer period of time, you have to be part of how this change is going to come about, how it will happen. So, and in that, there need to be particularly 3 things that I believe business needs to be involved in, as well as other stakeholders. The first is to ensure that the workplace is safe, is equal, and ensures justice. And here I think, starting from the problem of sexual harassment of women, which in this institution itself we have some experience with, but which we know is a problem now that's receiving increasing recognition in the country, bordering on to moving on to the extremes of violence that we're now aware in this society. People ask, what is going on? That it's so much, gang rapes are so much in the papers these days. I believe it's always been there. It's just that we're now much more aware of it, and the media is much more aware of it, and therefore I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that as a society we have our noses rubbed in the fact of what it is that the extent of the violence against girls and women that actually exists in this glorious society of Mother India. So safe, equal and just workplaces. The second is support for girls. And this has to be more than just the odd random, I will go in and support 5 schools here and pay for 2.5 there and then tick it off on my CSR box and then feel very good about the fact that I'm helping out with the girls. One of the biggest challenges we have is in fact to do with the fiscal deficit and the willingness to spend for ensuring that girls' education actually improves. What is it that business is willing to do, is willing to support the government to do, which might mean increased taxation and accountability for that taxation? And what is it that business itself is willing to do in this regard? I think this is an extremely important question. And similarly, of course, and far more than that, in the area of health. And the third one is, what is it that we're willing to do on violence against women and girls? It's not enough to have sort of the candlelight vigils every now and then. We need to actually ensure that our cities are safe for women, and that again means investment in safe cities. We need to ensure that our countryside is safe for women. One of the biggest challenges we have in education, and this is my last point, is not with primary school. Girls are in fact in record numbers in primary school, and that's because the primary school is in the village that you live in. But when you have to move from primary school, most of the time you have to go out of your village some distance to another village in order to enter the next level of schooling. And that's when all of the dangers kick in, all of the social and cultural taboos come in, all of the difficulties for girls, including such basic things as the availability of toilets, the presence of female teachers who will ensure that the girls don't get harassed in school. Those kinds of things are not there. What is it that we collectively must do? And I think I would say, if there's an ethical principle that underlines what needs to happen here, sustainability itself becomes an ethical principle. But I would say underpinning that sustainability has to be a sense of solidarity. It's not just about my daughter, it's about the girls of India. And I think that ethical principle of solidarity, which is the only one that actually makes a nation, needs to come in. And business has a very, very important role in this, which largely up to this point, it simply has not played. Thank you.
Thanks, Gita, because I think what you've really done is help to set the larger context for this panel, and thank you so much. And from there, let's listen to Sucharita, who's done some work around looking at women and small enterprises. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Gita, for drawing the broad brush so effectively. So I think Gita talked about the key forms of gender equality briefly but very well in terms of the social, the cultural, and the economic. And all I want to say is that they're all overlapping and intersecting. So, addressing any one of them in isolation is not really going to make a difference to the equality and empowerment of women. So we really need to look at how we work on it so that all the intersecting factors are taken care of. Having said that, what I'd like to focus on today is the economic empowerment of women. And really, I do believe that that is a very fundamental input or strategic action that we all need to be looking at, because without that, it's very difficult for even educated woman to step out of her environment if she does not have the confidence and the economic confidence and power to be able to sustain herself and her family. So a lot of what I'm going to say now this afternoon is going to be focused around that, because in the last 2 years particularly my work has been focused in that area. So and I just want to set the stage for that by sharing something which Lakshmi Puri of UN Women had stated some time ago, last year, to say that if all the women in the productive age group in our country, in India, were fully productive and active in the economy, India's GDP would be likely to grow by 4.2 additional points by 2020. I mean, that's really something mind-boggling. It's almost like our GDP growth would double if women became active players as employees, as employers, and as producers. So that's of course a wonderful statistic to hear about, but the reality, as we know, is very different. And our 50%, or in our country, slightly less than 50% of the population, is really way below in terms of being able to be fully active participants in the economy. But that's what is possible. So I just wanted to share this point, that that's what's possible if we get our act together and we start doing things right. So when we look at what should be the role of business, of government, of other stakeholders, and I think that also links into what are the changes then which need to be put in place. I think the key stakeholders, of course, in our country, as in most other nations, the government is a very major stakeholder which plays an important role. Business and industry, and when we talk about economic empowerment, I would look at business associations and associations of women, and community leaders, whether they are religious leaders or whether they are political leaders. They play a very important role, particularly in policy making and in the social cultural changes that we are talking about. And lastly, I think there is the major stakeholder is women themselves. And what is it that they should be thinking and talking about and stepping out for? So, having said that, what I see the government, and I think that's what everyone would agree with me, that they really play an enabling role. And their contribution is in setting the policy framework, providing some programs which will empower and enable women to become fully engaged and fully empowered in the economy, and providing suitable incentives for each stakeholder to be able to participate in an active manner. So that's really the role of government which I see. The role of business and industry, people are talking about CSR, how as a CSR they should be investing more on women's education, women's health, etc., and skill building. Whereas that's good, but really what I think would make for sustainability in the longer term, as well as make for sustainable enterprises, is if business and corporations start looking at investing in women in their workforce and women as part of their supply chain as a business case, not as a CSR. Because it's been proven that organizations that have inclusion and diversity in their workforce and their employees are more productive, more successful. Organizations that have a diverse supply chain in terms of having vendors and suppliers from different groups have access to more cost-effective solutions, more innovative solutions, and are able to reach to diverse sections of their customer base and user base, which is very valuable for them. So it's been proven that really it makes for more successful businesses and more sustainable businesses in the longer term. So I argue for businesses to really look at it not as CSR but as a business case for themselves to be more successful. Business associations have a major role to play in my belief. Organizations like CII, FICCI, and then there are the women's wings of those organizations. They play a major role in setting the agenda for industry that they serve. And they also form a linkage to the government, to the bureaucracy. So they also need to step up and play a role here. And start looking at how do they bring in more women members, first of all. I find that there are, in Bangalore, I spoke to CII, and they said that we just have about 3 corporations who are women-run and owned who are our members. One is Kiran Mazumdar Shaw's, and one is somebody, and just name 3 of them. So that's really where we need to start. And also there is, I find, not a recognition that women can be entrepreneurs and business owners in their own right. They typically, women in the economy are seen as employees or as producers or self-help groups and things like that. But I am seeing a huge upsurge of women who are going into entrepreneurship, and it's a whole new playing field for them, and there's a lot of work to be done by each of these stakeholders to help them get started, scale up, and connect to markets. So I'm making a case for a lot more intervention to happen in this space. Okay, so I'll just end with talking about, I think there was a question about good practices.
I'll come back to that on the principles. I think the last one we will do a round robin, though Gita already stated up front on solidarity, but I'm sure she has more on that.
Yeah, so let's do that.
So let's do that last section on the principles together. Each one of you really do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sucharita. Thank you. And I think it's interesting in terms of looking at economic empowerment and the role that it plays in the larger context of what Gita had said as the issues that we are facing. And institutionally, I think what I hear you also say, Sucharita, is there are challenges there that an organization like CII, which is really a business body, cannot identify enough women, and then of course we don't even have to go into banking and credit and access, and I think it just opens up inequalities everywhere. So I think thank you so much. I think that was interesting. Could I invite you, Lee, to make your statement?
不好意思 I say the Chinese.
Sure.
I mean, 我需要我的伙伴给我翻译一下。
I'm sorry, I'm from China and I need my partner to translate.
可能我没有把英语学好。
Maybe I didn't study English well.
我今天想说的是从中国的一次38妇女节的一个活动，中国妇女，现代中国妇女，因为中国经济发展的速度非常快，然后给了中国妇女很大的发展机会，但是她们也遇到了非常大的问题。
What I want to say today is just from issue on March 8th, Women Festival in China, and Nowadays, China's economy develops fast, but it also brought some problems to the women's in the equality.
2011年，中国最大的门户网站搜狐，组织了一个活动，然后在这个活动上，很多妇女谈了自己的害怕，一共8个。
In 2001, one of China's largest internet portal websites conduct an issue for women to talk about their fears. There are almost 8 kinds of fears that women has.
它8个怕是怕老、怕高、怕丑、怕胖、怕穷、怕剩、怕小三儿、怕平淡。
The 8 fears are aging, growing taller, back looking, getting fatter, lacking of money, being single, mistress disturbing, and uninteresting life.
参与讨论的人非常的多，但是在21世纪，就是中国妇女的发展遇到了非常大的瓶颈。
There are many people attended the discussion, and people may want to ask, in the 21st century, what kind of dilemma are Chinese female are facing to?
为什么？我想从2个方面来谈谈这个问题。
Why? I want to talk about this issue in 2 points.
应该说就是1949年之后，中国一直到现在，就从49年以后到现在，中国妇女的社会地位、政治地位有了非常大的这个提高。
Since 1949, the PRC funds and the status of women has improved a lot.
用国际的标准来看，就是参政、就业、受教育、健康，从这几个方面来看，都是发展的，都是提高的非常快。
From the point of international standard, it includes the political and economical and educational.
我觉得中国妇女地位的提高，有几个方面。主要是从1949年之后，就是中国政府的大力提倡妇女的平等。
There are several aspects of the improvement of the women's status. That's due to the government's effort.
当时因为中国是一个发展中国家，所以它需要非常大的人参与到社会建设上面来，所以国家利用，就是用国家的这种方式来动员非常多的妇女参与公共事业。
In the beginning of the PRC funding, there's a lot to make in economics, and there's not a lot need to construct. So the government call for women to join the construction.
再一个就是国家通过这个立法来讲这个性别的平等，比方说政治参与，还有一个呢就是中国解放以后，新中国成立以后第一部法叫婚姻法。
Also, through the legislation, the government ensured the equality. The first law passed after the PRC funds was the marriage law.
这个法呢，是新中国成立以后建的第一个法，因为在旧的就是传统的中国里，妇女是没有地位，所以妇女的婚姻基本上是买卖、包办，还有童养媳。
In a traditional society, women's marriage is more like selling, it's more like trade.
所以国家通过这个立法给了妇女平等的这个权利，然后让她们可以自由地选择这个婚姻，所以中国50年代离婚率非常高。
The government gave rights to the women to choose their marriage. So in the 50s of 20th century, the divorce rate is very high in China.
再一个呢，就是中国政府在平等的问题上就是扫盲。中国妇女大部分的中国妇女没有机会进入学校，所以他用了大量的这种扫盲，让妇女学习文化。
What's more, the government improved the education for the women. In the traditional society, the women don't have the right to get into the schools. So the country just set up schools for women to get study there.
因为在传统中国，女性无德便是这个才，就女性无才便是德。
In traditional China, there's concept that if a woman don't have talents, that is immoral.
这就是
You don't know your traditional way.
不需要那个学习的。我觉得这个里头就是建国以后，中国共产党用了很短的时间，在法律、意识形态、政治动员、行政干预等方面提倡男女平等，这个是深入人心，所以对中国妇女在政治、经济、社会、文化及其家庭中间的平等的提高是有非常大的作用的。
The Communist Party makes some policies and legislation to ensure the women's equality.
所以呢，就是中国妇女的有2个大的这个飞跃。第一个呢，就是从这种传统的这种家庭里头，变成了社会经济独立的人。
It contends to leaping development in women equality. The first one is that women just jump out of the traditional family to the wide society, and they are independent in economic.
第2个就是从这种过去的旧式的传统家庭的依附关系，进入了现代化的社会公共领域，成为公民，就具有公民权利的这样子的一种社会人格。
The second aspect is that they jump out of the traditional relations and to the society of public field, and they have civil rights.
但是这样子的一种大的转变是依靠国家来做的。
But this kind of transform is made by the government.
是通过从上到下，而不是妇女自己从内心开始的这种觉悟。
It is launched by the authority, but not the awareness of the women themselves.
第2个呢，就是中国妇女自己对自己的这个社会地位、自己的这种主体努力，实际上是缺乏，就是一个怎么样的一个自我认同。
The second is that women they don't actually recognize their effort in the society. Chinese women are under 2 pressures. The first one is social pressures.
然后一个来自家庭。
And another one is from the family.
他认为你是女人。
The family members of you are the woman.
对。然后如果你事业做得非常好，他们可以用一句话说你不像女人，然后中国人说叫女强人。
If you are good in your business, people will say you are not like a woman. In China, you will be called the strong women.
这个强人在中国传统社会里头是强盗的意思。
The strong in Chinese traditional is the robbery.
Robber， 就是抢东西的意思。
Robbery.
Yeah. A person who snatches and is aggressive. Okay, so that's a bad metaphor.
所以女强人是一个贬义词。
So the strong women is not a good word.
1978年中国改革开放，中国妇女的这个社会地位有了一个新的发展的这个阶段。
In 1978, the China government launched the revolution and the opening policies, and the women's status was improved.
我觉得这个变化来自于3个大的方面。
I think this change comes from 3 aspects.
第一个就是非常重要的1977年的恢复中国的大学考试。
The first one is the university entrance examination.
因为中国的文化大革命有10年没有大学的公平考试。
Because during the period of Cultural Revolution, people don't have the equal chance to get into the university.
高考的制度让中国的女性可以这个自由的去考大学，所以非常多的女性进入受高等教育。
The exam enable women to get into the high education, get into
好，很快
the university.
第二个是独生子女政策，
The second is the only child policy.
让更多的女性可以受到更多的社会资源。
It enables women to get more social resources.
还有一个就是这个市场经济的这种发展，所以给了女性一个发展的这个平台。
And the other is the marketing economic. It provides a platform.
但是由于市场竞争，由于中国的传统文化，女性的这个社会压力非常的大，所以她们受到这个就业的歧视，发展的这个困境，还有一个就是提升的问题。
But however, because of competition, the women are under a lot of pressure.
就是那个升职。
They're under the pressure of promotion in the workplace.
这个大的这个问题呢，我觉得是可能所有的国家都会遇到的这样的一个问题。
This problem all of the country they may face.
我觉得这个里头有非常多的一个问题是需要解决的。
There are many problems to be solved.
一个是我同意前面讲的，就是女性自己的这个内心的认识和对自己的这种认同，包括政治认同、社会认同和自己的一个觉悟。
The one is that I agree the previous talk that women should develop their recognition of themselves.
还有一个，我觉得对于所有的发展中国家，对于在这样的一种传统文化下，实际上是需要非常好的政策和法律来推动的。
Second, in the developing countries, the women equality relies the policies and the legislation.
我现在在学校里头面对非常多的学生，我是希望让他们有性别意识，还有如何去通过自己的这个活动来争取自己的这个权利。
I now work in a university and now trying to convey the gender equality to the students and let them to fight for their rights.
对，行，我们现在不需要是在说要不要平等，而是怎么做去争取这个平等。
Now we don't need to say whether we want it, and it's important for us to do it.
我曾经为我们学校的一个最大的特点就是女孩子占2/3。
In my university, the girls take part of the 2 out of 3.
但是厕所的面积，男生女生一样多。
But the toilets, the space of toilets, they are equal between the boys and girls.
我用了3年的时间去争取上厕所的权利。
I spent 3 years to fighting for the rights to go to the toilet.
然后现在我们的学校有一栋楼里头，女厕所的旁边还是女厕所。
There's one building in our university. There are 2 women toilets and 1 man toilet.
这在北京第一个。
This is the first one in Beijing.
因为时间关系，可能我想说的还很多。谢谢大家。
Because of the time is limited, what I want to say is more, but I have to stop here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was an interesting perspective, and I'm sure several people in the audience could connect with where you are coming from, because I'm sure several of us share many of those challenges. Thank you so much. And over to you, last but not the least.
Thank you very much. Just to issue a small disclaimer.
Sure.
I work for UN Women, but I'm not speaking for UN Women. I'm speaking here as a gender advocate.
Great.
And I'll just build up on what has been said by earlier presenters on the key gender inequality factors affecting women in Africa. And just to add that what has been said already, have been reflected in several ways. Because I come from here, and I'd like to make mention of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. That's an annual meeting that is held every year held in New York to assess where we're moving from and where we're moving to. And some of these inequality issues have been raised at these conferences. For example, the last few ones I can remember, there was discussions around financing for gender equality. There has also been discussions on violence against women last year. And the year before, I think we were looking at rural women and their contributions to development. And I can also think about some of the other meetings, like on migration and development. Also for Africa, we know the African Union has a gender policy. And they are also now looking at developing an Agenda 2063, because they are looking at a 50-year plan. And they've had consultations, and just last 2 weeks or so, they had a stakeholder consultation in Yaoundé, Cameroon, where one of the groups were women advocates, and they went through some of these key issues also around violence, looking at also security and peace for those in fragile states and all of that. So the issues are many, and like has been said before, it depends on where and how they affect you. Sometimes it's at a particular time, but another time is for another area. So these are some of the key issues, and we know, for example, that financing is such a key issue, but is an area that has not been well researched into. We know that national machineries, like the ministries and the government institutions that has to do with gender equality, are so burdened with so many responsibilities. Some of them not just gender, but they have to do with social protection and all of it. But generally, their budgets are less than 1% of their national budgets, and they are required to do all of these functions. So that is a key area that I think we should take note of. Another key area that we should look at is rural women, because I think most of the African women are in the rural economies. But again, we don't even take stock of their contributions to national economy. If you look at the care economy, for example, take HIV and AIDS, which is a key issue in Africa. Most of the care is done by women in our communities. But this is not captured anywhere, and women are seen as, I'm a housewife, I don't work. That they are doing the bulk of the work that governments should be doing. And today at the meeting, we had with all the men, business diversity, so just men. But in Africa, if you go to most of the markets, the women are the ones driving the markets. But they are limited when it gets to a certain point. When it comes to international business, you don't find them. And those are some of the unequal unfair. Somebody says, "What's unfair? The whole world is unfair." But those are some of the inequality issues that we can look at. But again, they all come from the cultural issues that have been mentioned already. What is the position of women, of the woman in the society? Woman shouldn't be heard, and in fact, you shouldn't be seen. So then, how do you express that these are your needs and these are your wants? And I like it very much when the former speaker said, women themselves are the main stakeholders. Because I think we all know that, of course, if women are included in our development, it's more sustainable. Women, from experience and from research, you know that if they're in business, they give part of what they earn to the family. They look after the kids, they educate them, and everybody wins. The women, the men, the children, everybody benefits from it. But most women see, like we hear from China, that maybe I should just stay at home. You know, my role is in the home, and I shouldn't be out there fighting for. So I think women themselves need to be conscientized, and they need to have more education. And I think that's the role of government, to create the right legal and policy framework, and also provide some financing for these sorts of activities to empower women to do what they're supposed to do. But again, businesses also have a role to play in it. And I'd like to mention here UN Women and the UN Global Compact came together and have put together what we call the Women's Empowerment Principles, 7 principles that businesses could adapt to empower women in their organizations. And when I look at that, then it comes out clearly for me what the role of businesses are. Investing in women, as we have heard, and ensuring that women have a rightful place in businesses. Sometimes some businesses have even put in place some facilities to ensure that women can be better parents. I know in Ghana, for example, they are building now an institution, and part of the institution, a room there, or a big room there, will be used as a nursery for mothers and all of that. So I think those are some of the things we need to look at. But having talked about business, I also want to talk about the role of civil society, including the media in all of this. And the media especially have a role of how to portray women in our media and how women are eventually perceived by our societies. So that is another area. But with civil society, I think one of the key areas that we have a problem with government especially, is on accountability, transparency and accountability. And that is one key role that civil society can play. Governments report to the UN bodies, they report to African Union and all of it, on all the commitments that they have signed. But most of the women don't even know the reports they are making. The system for reporting is nowhere near them. They are somewhere and the government is reporting somewhere, they don't know what is being reported. They are not even part of the people who set the agenda. So more or less, they don't even look out for any report. So I think CSOs have a role to help involve women in these issues. Of course, government itself has its own role. Businesses have their own role to play to ensure that everybody is involved. But CSO in particular, because of the nature of their work, are in a better position to do this, to ensure that women are involved in all these areas of setting the agenda and reporting and all of that. But I also think that we also need sex disaggregated data. Because when we report generally, and when we don't show what the impact of our development interventions are on different groups of women, on different groups of men, on children and all of it, then we have clouded the whole scene. We don't know where we should be paying particular attention to. And in the case of women, because, well, some countries say they have sex disaggregated data, but then the problem is if you have sex disaggregated data, it's not being used. So then, quite obviously, the data that we produce cannot be understood by the majority of people to do anything with it. So I think that, again, is an area we need to look at. Developing sex disaggregated data for planning, for monitoring, and for evaluating our programs. now about the critical principles that we.
I'll just ask you to hold on the principles.
Okay.
What I'll do is open the floor, get some questions, and we'll close the last 5 minutes with the principles. Okay? Great. Thank you so much for that. And I think you brought in several other perspectives, which in some ways tie to the others, what they have said, but also some new insights clearly in terms of what you were talking about as financing and how the budgets to the realities, I mean, if that's never taken care of. And I also like the idea of the last bit that you spoke about, how reporting is done. Yeah. Great. Floor is open to the panelists.
I hope that
Yes.
my question is not out of context over here. But there is no
Say your
representative
name.
from Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, sure. Your name and
And since it is a global forum, we
Yes.
talk about equality,
yes.
workplace, safety, and economic empowerment when we talk about political leaders, community leaders, and we have also met. But there is no reference to religious leader where the equality has to be extended, especially in Southeast Asian countries. The Bhikkhuni order, the female Buddhist nuns are not allowed to be ordained at all. They are being completely kept aside in the whole society. If they have to be ordained, they have to go to Australia or they have to go to America, but that they need to have the economic stability. I do not know any one of you could be able to give some kind of solution for this kind of equality to be retained in the Southeast Asian countries. Because Gita pointed out about the neighboring countries. Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Thailand and Myanmar, they are facing this crucial issue in their society.
That's an interesting insight. Gita, you want to say something on that? Yes. I think
One
you
of
should
the
keep it.
mics here.
Yes.
We do not have this problem in India because there are no Buddhist bhikkhunis. Whereas in Southeast Asian
So
countries,
is that itself an inequality there?
I would hold India up in this area as anything. I mean, point to me the Indian women who are allowed by any of the religions to actually officiate as priests. Very, very so. Let's not go there. My general thing is in terms of religion. I could say a lot. Sometimes I think that when it comes to gender equality and religion, I really want to leave it to God. I wish that the Maker would intervene and do something with the religious institutions because they are such a massive barrier so much of the time. Because they play the role of setting the norms, of telling people what's good, what's not good, how to behave, how to be moral, how to be, etc. And quite often they're completely wedded to inequality, including very much gender inequality. So I think I'm going to leave it to the Maker to answer, figure out the way to deal with that question.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add one word to that, to say that I think the answer and the demand has to come from the community themselves, that is the women. And we've seen changes happen. I mean, there was major religious opposition by religious leaders to family planning, for instance. But that's broken down now, because the community has said that that doesn't work for them, and they have demanded the change. So it's a long process, but I think it again comes down to if we want change, we have to ask for it and we have to stand for it.
Right, but at the same time, when you put money and religion together, Africa knows what happens, and which is happening right now in such a major way with the evangelicals in there, about, on the business of gender inequality. So, there's so much. There's no such thing as pure religion. Religion is about money, it's about politics, but it's the use of money, politics, and power to entrench inequalities again and again.
Let's take a few more questions. Yeah, you have that. Great.
May I request you to say your name and your organization?
Sorry, she wants to respond to that question.
这位女士的问题，我想说一下。我觉得文化是有遗传的，文化的教育可以导致集体无意识。
The culture can be conveyed generation by generation, and this kind of convey is kind of non-awareness. It sometimes happen quietly.
所有的这个
It is only in the South and Southeast Asia, not in the East Asia.
Yeah, we will
是
pick that up.
这样的文化就是男人在做事情，就是所有的那个角色的扮演应该是卢梭说过天赋人权，但是女人是在主导位。就是角色的就是在社会化中的角色。
People played different roles in the society, and the Rousseau said everyone was born equal, but women are in the kitchen.
Rousseau's okay, thank you. Yeah.
From IIMB. We just talk about the gender inequality between men and women. But I just want to know inequality between women and women with disability. Because I think there are lots and lots of added issues with women with disability which they are facing. So I just want to know the present scenario or issues or whatever it is, because what I've gone through and what I'm seeing in society and what I'm facing and what I'm experiencing, being so-called normal and being a woman with disability, that also is unequal in the same thing. So, thank you.
Yes.
My name is Sucharita. I am the Dean of Symbiosis Law School. I would like to respond to two of the points. One is about multiple inequality that it suffers, which the second wave of feminism focused much upon in terms of black women. Black women as well as those women who were slaves. I mean, something comparable to that. So that is the ideological construct that would help here. The other issue is the migrant women who face double inequality as non-citizens and as migrant labor, who may not be entitled to legal rights at par with other workers, especially in the black economy. Coming to the second point that I would like to respond to is, in all the presentations, what comes out very strongly is the stereotyping on the basis of gender, whereby culture, in a way, entrenches deeply this idea about women as women or LGBT community as LGBT community and not as people. So indignation itself, depriving them of justice and equality or privileges under the rule of law. What I would like to suggest here is that culture becomes a very major site of struggle. Culture, not only in the religious form, but also in the modern revival in the market form. Market-based culture is another challenge that I personally see, especially in terms of commoditization of women's body, women's self, or ignorance or non-inclusion of a large majority of those who don't look good. It could be the aged, it could be the disabled or so-called differently abled. So this is another issue to be tackled, because that is what forms a worldview, and that is something that could pave the way for fighting against equality. Thank you.
Give them as observations, feel free on the panel, because then we can get some more voices.
Good afternoon, and I'm from Bangalore. I have an initiative for research in business ethics. I'm also visiting professor in business ethics. We have been around talking for the last nearly 40 minutes about the inequality between men and women. Now, I just want to give an insight as to what's happening within women themselves. I know a company in which a so-called highly ethical woman, WMA entrepreneur, has employed only women with the sole purpose of exploiting them. If you understand how they're exploited, moment you employ women, what you do is underpayment. You don't have to pay the same salary which you normally pay for the men, because men always ask for more money. Here is a person, highly decorated. Almost all the awards in India talk on ethics, talk on gender equality, but within the same gender, this particular woman is exploiting the gender of her own category.
That may be isolated case.
There was the response given in the from Africa quoted about the Chinese exploitation in Africa. It's important not just to talk in forums like this, but if there is a specific case, to take the appropriate action in terms of taking legal action. Otherwise, it just remains as something which is discussed in a forum like this.
The very purpose of my talking is
Sure.
you all should know what's happening in the world.
That's why they were just responding.
Yes.
So that's fair. That's fair.
From Karunya University, Coimbatore. United Nations Organization has given 8 Millennium Development Goals, which are to be achieved by 2025. And some of them are reduction in poverty and hunger by 50%, then reduction in mortality rate, that is infant mortality rate, then mother's health, then gender equality and women empowerment. A few of them I remember. And based on this, one of my PhD students, he is doing a research work, and his topic is effect of women empowerment on other Millennium Development Goals. What he did is, there are altogether 8 Millennium Development Goals. He has pulled out one among them, that is women empowerment, and then he found out the relationship and effect of women empowerment on other Millennium Development Goals. And he has done a lot of regression analysis and all. And
What's the question? You have a question for them?
Just I'm giving you a comment. Only one more line.
Okay.
And what he found out is there is positive correlation between women empowerment and all other Millennium Development Goals. The bottom line is, if women are empowered, everything will fall in place. And he has done his research taking 22 countries, developing countries from all over the world. Okay.
Thank you.
And we all know that women's issues transcend all cultures. And I'm happy to see the men here to support the women, because the women cannot do this alone. We need your help, whether in the religious sector, in government, in business. You men have to support us too, because we're always supporting you. We carry the burden in the home and everything. Thank you for coming.
Okay, we now turn over for the comments on the. Is there one more?
Ask a question.
And Paul, thank you very much for the beautiful interventions and presentations. The topic for our discussion was gender equality. It's not only women, that is something which is to be noted. It's, of course, we have in our society a lot of discrimination and injustice meted out, which is to be taken note of. But the topic is gender equality. And therefore we have to start with respecting the dignity of human person, which is the beginning of gender equality, whether it is man or woman. I think we have to start with respecting and responding to the dignity of human person, where lies the beginning and the end of gender equality. Thank you.
You start in the room, go in
Yes,
reverse
go
order.
from here. And then your last, we'll come back to the principles. I'll give any other.
我想，
Yeah, it's okay.
我想问大家一个
No problem. She will.
，sorry 啊，我想问一下，因为发展中国家经济发展速度非常快，但是现在的妇女地位是在下降，就是女性的客观化问题老在媒体上被展示了出来。我觉得女性应该用什么样的方式来发展自己？
Professor, wants to ask a question that we're now in developing countries and the economy developing is very fast, but the status of women is going down. So Professor will want to ask what women can do to develop themselves.
Okay, good, yeah, good, yes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to touch on a few of the comments that we have heard. First, we heard about women's participation in religion, and I think that was already well responded to. But just to say that religion is situated again in our culture, it's part of our culture. So it's also going to be something that will take some time to change. But like we know from experience, if we mobilize and if we advocate hard enough, the change is possible. And then there was something about women with multiple inequalities, and Sister over there mentioned women with disabilities. And I think the issue has to do with us not lumping all women together, like she said, and looking at the different groups of women. And we know that there are very different groups of women. As we said earlier on, even the inequalities affect different people differently because of how and where they find themselves. Rural women are different from urban women, women with education are different from women without formal education, and all of it. And I think the issue of women with disabilities has come up severally, and there are various programs and various activities going on around women with disability. I think that's one of the issues that even the UN has picked up and has been working on quite recently. Then what is happening with women themselves, what's like we heard, maybe in every society, there are exemptions to the rule. And I hear people say something sometimes that women are their own worst enemies. I don't know if you've heard about that. Yeah. And I really, there's nothing to actually prove that women are their own worst enemies. As we heard earlier on, people mean good. If they say you have to go through, for example, widowhood rights or female genital mutilation or whatever, inside them, they think that is the right thing to do. That is what they have been taught to do. That is why it is being done. So I think the role of those of us who have the ability to do is to continue with the advocacy, to let people know that these are not ways of working with each other, that if we really want to be each other's keeper, we need to move beyond those sort of issues. So they do happen, but we need to work on it. And finally, gender equality, not to respect, starting from the human rights perspective. I think that is what gender equality is about. Looking at women, men, children, all groups of people as having the same value as human beings and working from there. So I think most of the instruments that we work with have their grounding in human rights instruments. For example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also the African Union Solemn Declaration on People and Human Rights, and all of it. They are all from the human rights perspective. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anything, Sucharita? Any last? Gita, both of you, anything that you wanted to particularly respond to the comments?
No, I think both of them have responded.
Gita has something, and after that, Gita, you can kick off your principles. What are principles? Yes. Yes.
I think I already did that. But I just want to say one thing. I want to one of the challenges that happens whenever there is a session like this on gender inequality is it goes all over the place. People talk about just about anything and everything. And the question, I think, fundamentally for this group is the role of business. And can business play a leadership role in this area? I think business, yes, the World Economic Forum has done yeoman service in producing that gender gap report. I think it's done more among business for sensitization on the issue than just about anything else, at least globally, in terms of corporations and so on. But at the national level, you don't see it being picked up. And I think that there is a fundamental challenge, and it's a civilizational challenge. I really think it is. The civilizational challenge is basically this. There are some things in which business has a fundamental role, which if it doesn't take that role to be for the good, will inevitably be for the bad. If it doesn't step in and be the leader for the good, because many of these things, it's like climate change. Many of these things are things which are somewhere between global public goods and those things which may not be just pure public goods, but which may benefit individuals, but also which, unless they are done collectively, will not be done at all. And given the great role that business plays in the economy, in politics, and in the transformation of culture, as our friend from the law school was saying, it's a really important role, and I think business is failing in this regard. And it's certainly failing in India. It's failing as badly on these issues as on the social issues, as it is failing on the climate change issues. And if it's not willing to step in, then we're all going down the tubes. And I frankly don't think, the challenge of whether there's a woman employer who disempowers the women working for her, she's doing what she's learned beautifully from all her colleagues who are male, which is how to improve her bottom line best of all, and maybe win a few prizes on the side because she employs women. But that's not neither here nor there. It's not a matter of individuals, it's something that collectively there has to be a leadership to come together. Business has done it in the past, sometimes kicking and screaming. If we think where social welfare systems in the world came from, where social security came from, business didn't hand it out. Business never does these things unless it's brought to the table kicking and screaming. Perhaps there's not been enough kicking and screaming at this point that has happened. But unless that happens, everything else just remains as talk. It doesn't really move.
Okay, thank you, Gita. Anything to contribute to the principles?
Yeah.
Last word.
What I'd like to say is that, the bottom line is, it's clearly proven that women, when they are active in the economy, it makes good sense for them, their families, their countries, the global economy. Because the research shows women spend 90% of their income on their families and their communities, as against men spending about 49%. So it just makes sense for everybody to be investing in the women and making them active in the economy. So, having said that, I just want to give some very concrete examples of what can happen and what is happening. One is
principles, Sucharita. Last page. It's just around. Just what last?
Yeah.
So like she said, solidarity. Is there one or two principles?
I'm going to because I believe it's all about action on the ground. So the first stakeholder is the government. And in India, we have the public procurement policy, which says that 20% of whatever the government buys will be from small and medium enterprises. And all our women entrepreneurs are in that sector. So what we must make a pitch for is to say that 5% of that 20% should be kept aside and procured from women in business. That's one. The second one is about the business and industry themselves. And I think the organization that I belong to, WEConnect, is a very concrete example of what is possible when there is a partnership. So some of the major Fortune 500 corporations have recognized that it makes sense for them to reach out to women and bring them into their supply chain. So they have supported WEConnect to come into existence we reach out to women businesses, we certify them as women owned and run, and we introduce them to these corporations to be considered as vendors and suppliers. We also do a lot of work in helping them to do business between themselves and to scale up, because they are so small, and we know that there are additional cultural and social factors where women are concerned. Like we said, women need to step up and recognize that they are as good in business as men are. Just because they were told you should stay at home and look after your families does not mean that they are not good in business. But they do need some inputs, more training, education, and that's what all of us are here for. And the one underlying principle which I would like to emphasize is that we have to create a platform where all these players come together, whether it's the government, whether it's industry, whether it's associations, academic institutions, and women themselves, to creatively create a platform for action. So I'm glad that we are all here today, and I think this is a springboard for something like that to happen. Thank you.
Yes, I think we are in a very unique position. Most of our governments come into power because businesses have supported them to run their campaigns and all of it. So I think they have a huge influence in our countries, in our societies. And it will be good that businesses don't pay lip service, as we heard. We don't just do CSR, but actually show some commitment and work with government to show that we have in place the right legal and policy framework that promotes gender equality. And even go beyond that to ensure that there's funding for the work that we need to do to promote gender equality. But having said that, then the businesses themselves need to be sure that within their businesses they are promoting gender equality. For women in leadership, women on their boards to at least make a commitment that a certain percentage of their board members be women and all of that. Also to ensure that women get equal pay for equal work. We are not just talking about salaries, but all the allowances and all of the opportunities that come with the post. Women should be able to benefit equally from that. And they should create the right environment for women to participate in business. And that's something that women themselves too can do anyway. And also to note that another area that businesses can help with would be research, in the area of research, funding research and development. That is one area that governments find so difficult to fund. That is one area that private sector would benefit from anyway if they did that. And so we would encourage private sector to also look at research and development in the area of gender equality, because what is not measured is actually not managed properly. So that is also key. And it's just the principle.
Any one?
Yes, finally, I also want to mention that the Women's Empowerment Principles are it's on the website. So if people want to look at it, there are 7 principles that they're encouraging businesses to sign up to. And one of the key things is not just look at inside the businesses, but also look at community. So it's not just the business, but also your value chain down the line and how you can help to develop it. So maybe helping to mentor young girls or what have you. There are different ways that businesses can help in that regard.
Thank you.
Last one, yeah. 他们都说太多。我长话短说，我认为真的要争取这个女性的平等，我觉得有几个方面。第一，我强调女性自己的努力，自己强大了才有这个权利和别人平等的对话。
I'd like to make it short. The first one is that the women themselves effort.
因为我们不能马上改变这样子的一个不平等的环境和不平语境下的这种的活动，所以我们先把自己建设的强大。
We can't right now change the condition that we're in unequal, so we have to first develop ourselves.
第二个，我们依靠外在的条件，就是政府提出具体的能够提高女性地位的和保障女性平等权利的具体的可行的政策。
The second one, we can get help from the government, the practical policies.
它不过就是一个条件。在中国，可能你们都知道，刚刚开的这个18届三中全会，就是关于退休，实际上在中国男女是不平等的。现在可以争取到让女性跟男性同年龄退休。
For example, China just launched a policy that the age of retirement, the women and men can be the same.
我觉得必须是把女性的权利能够通过自己的努力把它写进法律，写进国家的政策，才能真正的去实现。这是第三个。
And only if the women's rights can be achieved only by writing it into the laws.
最后一个，我觉得就是女性必须自己有自己的组织，通过自己的运动，通过自己的努力，然后不断的去推动一个平等社会的建立。
The last one, I think, the women should have their own organizations, their activities, so to improve the equality.
而且建立自己的阶段性目标，一步一步的朝着更理想的方向前进。
And to set goals and take steps to the ideal world. Okay, thank you.
Okay, 谢谢。Thank you very much. On that note, I must confess I've been a terrible moderator, but I had great panelists who self-moderated. So thank you very much for that.
I couldn't resist sharing this. Ever since, India is here, China is here, Africa is here. Everyone talks about the power of the 1 billion in China, and India is powerful, 1.2 billion who are going to overtake the global economy. But there's a very quiet revolution of the 3rd billion. And that 3rd billion is the women. And there is a study by Booz and Company which says that by 2030, they will be the most powerful in the global economy. And they will not be from the developed countries, but they will be from countries like Africa, Asia, the BRICS, etc. So here's to the 3rd billion.
Thank you.
Thank you.